Hello and welcome to Authentic Conversations Emoji. It's Saturday and I know you guys are not used to me coming on live. I'm going to give people a few minutes to come in and then I will bring in my special guest today. The conversation today is something that's been bothering me for quite a while. And I'll say about 5 years. When we talk about racism in the US, most people are thinking about big things, like people getting killed. There's just been too many series of Black people getting killed and Black people or Black and brown people getting jailed. And I understand that it's a huge issue out there. I totally understand it, and I'm very in tune with what it's like to be an African American in the United States, the land of the free. So along the years, I made a lot of noise like everybody else. I have marched. I started to think about what do we need to do to become proactive and not reactive, right? So I started to take a lot of classes and go online and do research and whatnot to see what it is that we can do differently, because we can't continue to do the same thing all the time. When somebody gets in trouble or when somebody gets killed, then we all start marching. How about we start thinking of ways to change the people around us and the things around us so we can have a different narrative? And I understand racism is not going anywhere, so hang tight and I'll bring in my guest. This is Mojisola Wilson. Authentic Conversation is the name of the show. Hello and welcome back to the studio. So I have a few guests today, and the first person I'm going to bring on is Anne Marie, and then I will bring on Kevin White. Okay, so stand there and hang tight with me. Hello, Anne Marie, how are you? I cannot hear you.
You can't hear me? My mic was working when I checked it.
Do you have a headset to put on?
No.
Bingo, I can hear you now.
Okay.
How are you?
It takes a second to kick in.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you guys that don't know how to shift, to join us on the show, if you'd like to come in afterwards, feel free to inbox me or something like that, and I'll bring you right in. Let me bring Kevin in, and then we'll get you guys to introduce yourselves. All right, and we're waiting for two more people. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, Kevin.
Fantastic.
Hello, Anne Marie. How's everybody?
Good.
Fantastic. So, Anne Marie, why don't you tell the audience a little bit?
I guess I'm a little not centered. Okay, much better. I'm a newbie at this stuff, so bear with me. So were you asking me? Who am I?
Yeah, just give us a slight introduction, a small introduction of who you are and such.
I'm simple, pushing 50, girl from Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn. I live in Staten Island. And I'm a broker owner of a real estate company called Prodigy Real Estate. And I'm a single mother of one child, one son.
Fantastic. And Kevin, would you be kind enough to tell the audience a little bit about you?
Sure. I am a IT professional in my 60s, lived and worked through most of the East Coast of the country. Glad to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to have you guys. I have two more people that I'm waiting on, Danny Panzella and Ifa Lade, but we can start the conversations really. Just before we start, this is not a show about bashing, white people or whatnot. This is a show, Authentic Conversation, so we can really dialogue amongst ourselves to try and figure out a way, what do we do going forward? As an African-American woman that I lived in Staten Island as well, and I was a realtor. I am a realtor in Staten Island. I own a real estate office just like Anne Marie, quite a while. I've been in the business about 30 years, and I understand that the times are changing. Kevin, they just are not changing fast enough. So one of the things that I wanted us to talk about is what we hear or what we have seen in the past few years growing up. I brought American people on, because Kevin, your experience as an African American is slightly different from mine. For some reason, because I have an accent, I think I get a little bit of a pass, so to speak, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, I think we should all talk about, is I need to ask everybody on the panel, Do you think you slightly biased when it comes to race? Because some people say no, some people say maybe. Anne Marie, you go first.
For me, no. Only because I was raised very differently. What I grew up around and how I was raised in my home is two different, it's apples and oranges. Did I see racism in and around my neighborhood? Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Bensonhurst, a block away from where Yusuf Hawkins was murdered. So I was there present, watching the protest marches. I was in the heart of all of that. I knew the people who were, I grew up with the people who were arrested in that murder. But how I was raised in my household was a whole different animal. I mean, my parents I'm first generation born American, and my parents are both born in Italy. And my mother, in Italy, it's, you have your different kind of levels of, same prejudices. My mother grew up in Sicily, which, on a farm, and she married my father, who was born in Naples, the city. So my father was kind of frowned upon for marrying a country bumpkin, right, from where he came from. And my mother, I remember telling me the story of when she first came to this country. She was in junior high school, and she experienced, prejudices to herself. She barely spoke English. The other Italians who were from the city in different cities in Italy kind of really didn't befriend her. The American kids that were, white American kids that were in her school didn't befriend her either. She was poor and she was, barely spoke English. She always said her first friend was a black girl who they could barely communicate because of my mother's language barrier. But she was the one who sat down and shared her lunch with her. And so from there on, my mother said, you do not judge people based on who they are and where they come from, because your own people can turn on you, and she said, you will find friendships in places where other people will tell you you will not. My father traveled the world. He worked on a cruise ship from the age of 16 years old. So he was exposed to all different cultures. So for us, baby of 5 kids, we were always raised not to judge people, based on anything. So I was blessed in that sense that I was raised, colorblind.
Right. I'm so grateful for your transparency. Kevin, you were born in America. You're an African American born and bred. So would you be kind enough to tell us if you have any kind of bias, and then I'll tell you.
I think everyone has some kind of bias. Everybody has some kind of prejudice. I don't think that that's something we can avoid. The object is to not let it affect your interactions with other people.
Right.
As a Black American, growing up, one of my best friends was a conservative white guy who had never had, grew up in a totally different environment. His parents were Irish American, very racist. And yet on the first day of school when we met, we became instant friends, and we bonded, and we've been friends ever since. And that's since 1969. And we had very different political views, very different experiences. But we were able to teach each other. And I think that's the important part. I don't hold biases against anybody. I think everybody has them, like I said. It's just you can't let that affect your life. You have to move past that. You have to see people for who they are. My parents were very involved in the civil rights movement. I grew up being very aware of my status as a Black American. But I had to view other people in the way I wanted to be viewed. You just can't let that affect your life. I mean, it's going to affect your life in that, yes, I face prejudice, I face bias, I face racism, and I have to deal with that. But,
I hear you.
Go ahead.
No, I thought you were done. Sorry.
No. Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Well, I have Danny Panzella on, and I'm going to bring him to join us in the studio. Hello, Danny. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Dan.
Anytime, Danny. I like your views. They're kind of like, all out there. That's why I brought you in, because we needed to have somebody on the other side. But tell the audience a little bit about yourself, will you please?
Okay, well, I'm 43 from Staten Island, New York as well. I currently live in Brooklyn. For about the past 10 years, I've been an activist with cop watching. Actually, I became an activist a little bit before that, and I started to experience what a lot of people of color experience from the NYPD, maybe not to the same degree, obviously, because obviously being a straight white man, I'm pretty much at the top of the pyramid, right, of privilege. But when you're protesting something that's unpopular or that the police themselves disagree with, then all of a sudden the First Amendment doesn't exist. Then all of a sudden I was actually accused of assaulting an officer because I brushed against his pinky, like literally. I have video of this, it's crazy. And that's when I started to really realize, oh, this is the experience that many people of color experience. And so that's when I became a Cop Watch activist. I figured, let me use my privilege to be out there filming cops, making sure, hopefully, that they're not going to continue to abuse people if they're being filmed. So I started an organization to do that. I'm not so active, but I like to say that I live a Cop Watch lifestyle, in that whenever I see police interacting with people, especially people of color, I will stop and watch, and I try to take time out and make sure that there's going to be accountability, that there's an audience there, so that hopefully it makes police think twice. Although it seems like they've gotten even more brazen. And even with all the videos coming out and getting exposed, it doesn't seem like it's really stopping. Now I live in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and so there is a lot of opportunity for me to Cop Watch still.
One of the things that we do with this is for each and every one of us to take accountability, honestly, for our surroundings. Because look, if we look at the whole ocean, like my wife always says, you can't boil the ocean, or you can boil the ocean one cup at a time. We already know what the problems are. There's nothing, I don't think anybody, unless anywhere in the world, doesn't know how intense the racism has become in the United States at the moment. But one thing a lot of us forget to do is that we don't look in as our surroundings, and which is one of the things that I think we have to start to consider. I asked the question of Anne-Marie and Kevin, and I said, do you think you have some kind of bias when it comes to race? And they answered that question. Would you give us an answer, but make it very short?
Sure. Yeah, I think that we all absolutely have prejudices. I think society, especially as a white man, has trained me to be prejudiced since I'm born. I think that it's something that we all have subconsciously, and we have to work every day. And this is what I've been working on, for the last 10 years, is trying to root out all those biases that have been programmed into me since I'm a kid, to try and overcome them.
Right. Hold on one second. Anika, this is not a cop bashing show. I don't do cop bashing shows. I'm not interested. But it's important for every voice to be heard, because we all have a different kind of pain from our experiences and things that's happened to us. And that's what determines how we react or not react to certain situations. So thank you for your question, Anika. But I'm going to answer the same question I posted to you guys. And it took a lot of self-searching for me to come to the conclusion that in my own way, because of systematic conditioning, I have a little bit of prejudice towards white people, because unfortunately, and it took me a long time to realize that there's a fear behind a lot of the things that happens in society of not understanding each other. And that's why it was important to balance this panel out. As an African person that came to the United States, I believe I was maybe 16 or so, I lived with an Irish family, so I didn't get to experience what a lot of my African American friends were going through. I lived in a sheltered, privileged community, and because of my social status as well, I got privileges that was assigned to me, not earned, right? So when you talk about an African American and the experiences, it didn't hit me until I left my Irish family and I had to go out there and go to university, and we were only 5 Blacks in the whole school, right? And then that is when I got a taste of reality. So we all know what the facts are. We all know that there are racist people out there. We all know that times are changing, they're just not changing fast enough. One of the things that I realized when I look is unconscious bias, right? For a lot of people, we don't understand, we don't see it. Things that we've been told in the past growing up, you say something often enough, and I started to watch it around my son. Because when you say, oh, Black people, because I do it all the time, oh, Nigerians are this, Nigerians are that, as time goes, he starts to believe that all Nigerians are a particular way. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So, Kevin, in your walk, what are the sort of things that you as a Black man have experienced that has been almost unconscious bias from the person that did discriminate against you?
Oh, I think that one of the things that has always happened, we always hear people say, oh, well, you talk so white, or that's a white thing to do, and things like that. And you get that from both sides. That's always bothered me. My parents were very big on education, and I went to private schools. So very often I was the only Black person in my class. At one point I was one of only 10 Black people in a school, and my class was 600 people. And that gives you a very different perspective. And going into the work world and now being in IT, where I am the only Black person in IT. I mean, if I go to an IT conference, it's very rare that I see another Black person. It's very rare that I don't think I've ever seen a Black woman in IT at a conference. And that leads people to believe that there aren't Black people in IT. It leads people to believe that we're a different set of, that, we're all athletes, so we're all musicians or rappers. And that leads people to treat you very differently. If it comes to experiences with bias and racism, I'll give you an example of something that happened to me about a year ago. I was walking down the street going to work. It was summertime, and a car pulled up with 6 white guys, and they jumped out. And they said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Who are you?" And the guy looked at me and goes, "I asked you who you are." I said, "Yeah, so what? I don't know who you are." He goes, "Well, we're looking for a guy who committed a crime." I said, "Oh, are you police?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "Well, do you have a badge?" He goes, "I don't have to show you anything." And he tried to question me, and I said, "You have no right to question me. You have no right to stop me. I don't know who you are, and I'm going about my business." They let me go. I filed a complaint with at the police precinct, and the first question the police captain asked me was, "Well, what were you doing that they stopped you?" Not, why did we stop you? But the assumption was that I did something wrong. And I think that's a big assumption that is often made. I can't just walk down the street and be innocent. I have to be up to something. And it happened in Georgia with the guy who got shot.
Yep.
I mean, and I think a lot of people can't relate to that because it's not their experience.
And it's not their reality, because until it happened to me, honestly, it was something on the outside. And if you know me, I'm able to look at things from both sides of the coin, being a Libra. So when it happened to me, and I'm driving down the street on Staten Island with my wife in the car, and we got pulled over for reason. We didn't run the light. I was driving. I didn't run the light, nothing. And the guy just pulled us over. And then once he ran my plates and saw that it was a business car, and I gave him my ID, and he goes, "Oh, you are Solar, da, 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 da." Then he let me go. What if I was in Solar Realty? What if I was in Solar Worldwide Realty? What if I was just Shakwena from down the block, riding a bike at 9 o'clock at night, just minding a business? What would have happened? But also, just to give another example, is when we bought the house that we're in at the moment. Workers were working on the house and they were doing their thing, and I'm handy. So I'm 6 a.m. in the morning. I get up, I go meditate by the pond, which is one of the reasons why we bought where we bought. There's literally four Black people in the whole community of 400 homes, right? So I go to I sit by the lake, and the policeman or the security guard walks up to me and says, do you live here? I said, no. He goes, do you work here? Do you work here? And I said, no, I live here. Then he asked me for my address, and I said, why? Why don't you tell me where you live? He says, show me ID. I said, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Who walks around with ID walking through their community? But at the end of the day, my wife got on the phone with the management company, and that particular company was fired. That particular security company was absolutely fired. They changed it. So it got me into thinking, yeah, Anne Marie and Danny. A lot of times, what I see with non-African Americans is that there's compassion for what we are going through, right? I worked with Anne Marie for many years in her real estate office before I went back and opened my own. And one of the things that transpired in those days was, what's his name was killed in Staten Island, if you remember. What's the name of the Black guy that was killed in Staten Island?
Eric Garner.
Eric Garner was killed around that time. Trayvon Martin was just murdered. It was like 1, 2, 3 things were happening all at the same time, and I was yelling. My voice was very vocal, very loud on social media. And one of the things that I forgot to do is that I'm surrounded by non-African Americans, literally. Everybody around me, my friends, because of the business that I'm in and the town I lived in. But I forgot that all of them are not like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to bring that up, right?
Yeah, it's important.
Let's talk about mine and Moji's relationship. We've
Yes.
had a tumultuous one. We're sisters to the true, definition of the word. We fight like sisters. We have, and there's been throughout our relationship. I mean, we've been friends. It's going on over 10 years now at this point. And we've had arguments, and there have been racial undertones coming from both sides, between us, right? And I think one of the issues is like you just said, is the lumping people together.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest problems I feel that society has. We're lumping, we're looking at bad apples and we're going, okay, well, what color are those bad apples? There's bad apples here, there's bad apples there. And then that's making the whole majority fighting over those bad apples, right? So like, for example, I'm going to give you an example. Me and Moji, right, grew up very differently. She went to boarding school. She grew up in a very prominent, wealthy family. I grew up, dirt poor, 5 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. And, my struggles were very real. I dropped out of high school. I didn't go back to college until I was 24 years old when I hit the proverbial, glass ceiling. But I had very, strong struggles in my life, financially throughout our lives, growing up and even after becoming a single mother and having all of those struggles, right? So when I understand the term white privilege. I understand what white privilege means. I know the whole, political science major. I got that all down pat. But at the same time, when Moji would come at me and say, you're privileged and you don't understand, but I would feel like I would get offended by that because she's taking away my struggle, my story, because of the color of my skin.
But was it really your story? Let me, Kevin and Danny, please bear with us on this one. It's very important because a lot of people go through it. I have different races of friends in their sphere. One of the things that I learned, and unfortunately, life lessons don't come cheap. It was a lot of tears, a lot of pain, and a lot of therapy. Honestly, one of the things that I learned is that and I used to say it, my being pro-Black does not make me not pro-white, if that makes any sense. Because here I am. Look, I was in my 40s when I went through what I call a Job moment, right? I was already 40 when the market crashed in 2008, and you remember that, and Marie does, and everybody does in America. So I got to understand, and a lot of my clients as a realtor were Section 8 tenants. Even me, as a person of privilege, and I always say I come with a different privilege because of the way I look, the things how I speak. I had to come down to their level, as in when you're dealing with a lot of Section 8 tenants that are not as highly educated as the rest of the world, so to quote unquote, you have to speak their language. And a lot of times what happens is that when I want to go sell a house in a particular neighborhood and I'm discriminated against, that anxiety and emotion and anger and all that stuff comes to the surface when I hear somebody's murdered that's Black. Does that make sense? And that's one of the reasons why this dialogue is very important between all of us.
Right.
Because when we bring it home, it's no longer, Eric Garner out there. It's no longer Trayvon Martin out there. It's no longer somebody else. So when you talk about privileges, we all know that there's privileges that comes. Even if I run into Kevin and I didn't know Kevin, and this is unconscious bias, and Kevin is in a sweatsuit, and Kevin, I have a lot of respect for you. I've known you over 15 years or so. But if I run into you and there's an elevator door that opens, and you're standing there, and I know nothing about you, and you're in a pair of sweatsuits, in my head, I'm not coming in the elevator with you, just me and you alone. And I'm an African-American woman. You can imagine how a white person feels, because it's, again, unconscious bias is one of the things that we all need to start to pay attention to. Because even me as a Black woman, I have a lot of unconscious bias that I've been learning. I've been watching my mannerism and the way I act around people. I clutch my wallet closer if I see what we call a yo boy. You know what that is, right? Does any of you guys know? And that's racism from a Black person to another Black person. So understanding everything amongst all of us, I think we need to bring to the table the facts, the honest truth about what we can do to create a change in people's attitudes, because what we see on TV is what we believe. What we hear on the radio is what we believe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, I'd like to respond to Anike's comment about not all white people are racist and not all cops are killers.
Right.
I agree with the statement that not all white people are consciously racist. I think that we live in a society that is racist, or has a very large component of it that is racist, and a lot of it becomes unconscious because we're raised in it. So for me, it took me being in an interracial relationship and years of struggle in that relationship for me to really be able to empathize with the point of view of people of color, because I did not have those experiences growing up, right? Like I mentioned that activist story, that was like one little thing that kind of piqued my awareness a little bit, but it was very superficial. And it took years of struggle with my wife, of her trying to tell me, and this is how I'm treated in the world. And I'm like, oh, you're just being sensitive, and you're overreacting, because I never experienced that. So I assumed other people aren't experiencing it either. And if somebody says they are, it's because they're being oversensitive. And I think that's really the beginning of how we can change this and shift it, is by looking inward and saying, can I stop and put my ego aside, my opinion aside, my worldview aside, and look at the world through the experiences of other people? I think the most important thing as a white ally that I can do is listen to the experiences of people of color, and then try and see, am I perpetrating any of those things against them?
Exactly.
It's really just looking inward. It's not even about judging other people. Oh, that white person's racist. That person's racist.
Right. And I agree with that. But I have to tell you, it has to come from both sides, because to say that it only exists one way is really not. That's what I think is always the problem. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's doing more than the other? You know what I mean? And it eliminates, and I think that it discredits those people who are not. I'll give you an example. When I worked in a coffee and cocoa company, when I was fresh out of high school, I was surrounded by all men. I mean, this was in a trading company. I was, they saw me as a dumb white chick from Brooklyn. I was surrounded by all white men, and Hispanic, white and Hispanic. And they finally hired a woman in my department who was going to be my supervisor, and she was a Haitian woman, right? I was so excited to have a woman, you know, and I was so excited to be able to go, okay, I have a comrade here, you know, somebody who can kind of have my back now, woman to woman, we're going to know each other. She tortured me.
Yeah.
Tortured me. But why? Because it was because of the color of my skin. And it took her a long time. We eventually got to a point where, you know, we bonded, but it took her a long time to get to that stage because she made assumptions of who I was, where I grew up, how I grew up, and, you know, my privileges because of the color of my skin.
But
You know?
is that her being racist, or is that her reacting to racism?
Right, that's what I'm
right?
saying.
It's understandable that people of color would be mistrustful of white people.
Absolutely. I don't discredit where it stems from, the conditioning that it takes to get it to that level. I get that, and I appreciate that. But you also have to understand, you know, someone else's point of view as to where you get. You know, when I grew up in the heart of Flatbush when I was a kid, and it was very clear and defined that half the block was white, the other half the block was black. Like literally,
Yeah.
literally, I lived on Coney Island Avenue. Half the block was black and half. Now, my mother limited me because I was little to only play within the, you know, the 3 houses that, you know, that were in front, right immediately in front of my house. Would she have cared if I played with the little black girl that lived up the block? No, but that was only if the little black girl could come up the block. But her mother was keeping her within her, you know. We had no choice but to be separated, you know. But that's what I'm saying. Like, these kind of things are what happens, you know.
I hear what you're saying. And I think what is very important is that we all have to start to pay attention. And again, understanding the privileges that we have helps us to see, and I say that coming from where I'm sitting today, in the, you know, in my skin, in the chair, and along my journey. Even as a Black woman, when I show up in certain places as Mojisola Wilson, you know, the wife of, you know, XXX person, the owner of XXX business, I still get treated differently than the average Black person. So we all have privileges that are assigned to us that we do not earn. Now, Kevin, I'm going to ask you a question, and please don't laugh at me. Can Black people be racist? I've been having that debate all over the place.
I'm gonna answer that question, but I also want to say something else about privilege. To answer your question, yes, Black people can be prejudiced. Whether they can be racist or not, I think there's a matter of semantics there.
Yeah.
In terms of whether a minority can be racist against the majority,
Right.
and that leads to a hours long discussion.
A lot of people, Kevin, don't understand that. You know, that's you know, we read books.
That might be true. And the point I want to make about privilege is this. What we need to do to end some of this is that white people have to accept the fact that they have privilege. And privilege doesn't mean that you grew up poor, or that you didn't grow up poor, that you grew up rich. Privilege doesn't mean anything other than the fact that as a white person, you benefit from the fact that the society is biased in your favor.
Right.
As a white man, as a white woman, when you walk into any venue, any job or anything else, you are assigned certain privileges that a minority person does not get. And it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter anything else, your white skin affords you certain privileges. And we need for white people to understand that. And it doesn't mean that you're racist, it doesn't mean that you're prejudiced. All it means is that on the basis of your skin, people view you a certain way. If you as a white person walk into a drugstore, you are not followed around. It doesn't matter what you look like, you will not be followed around. When I walk into the CVS on the corner in Midtown Manhattan, the security guard, regardless of his color, will often follow me around. And that is the problem. And that is when the unconscious bias comes in and everything else. And until white people accept the fact that they have that privilege and that everything that they have is based on a racist system, we can't solve any of these problems.
See, that's so very important. And thank you for being very transparent, because one of the things that I started to write about on my page lately is, I sat down the other day and I remembered our son was trying to come into the community, but he didn't have his ID on him. We have a gated community that's manned by ex-police officers and things like that. It wasn't a white man that stopped him and said he couldn't come in. He had an ID that said his name, but it was a New York State ID, and the guy knew my name. He knows my name. He's Nigerian as well. And he did not let him in. So my wife called and said, that's our son, right? That's my son. And the guy goes, well, he doesn't have the right whatever. And my wife goes, did you check in the computer? Because everything is computerized. Now, she didn't panic until the guy said, oh, well, he can't come in anyways. And we heard, our son in the background going, I'm coming in because, he's American, born and raised here. He doesn't understand the real world. And my wife got very upset and dashed there, like literally no shoes and everything, because she was afraid he could get shot. Now, last week I started to think, how do we get where we need to go? The reason why the movement was slightly successful in the 60s was because white and black people came together and walked hand in hand, right? Not a lot of white people, but people came together and worked hand in hand. So I thought it was time for us to start to think about what we can do. What are the signs? What are the things that we do to oppress somebody else that even, it's also, that's why it's called unconscious bias, right? So what are the types of things that people should be looking out there for in their own small little space? I'll let you start, Danny.
Honestly, I got distracted by Dr. Wilson's comment. If you want to pop that up there, because this is absolutely important. And this is what I have over the last several years been trying to implement into my life, is just to make sure that I'm never taking advantage of anyone else who has less privilege than I have. And, the other thing I want to say is that the story that you just told about your son coming to the security gate, and for Dr. Wilson to have to run out there to possibly prevent him from being harmed. I want anybody who has a light skin color to think about that. Have you ever had to live that experience? Why should anyone have to ever live that experience? That is horrible, but that is the result of the system that we live in. And for me, one of the things that I try to do is, and I try to do it in an empathetic way, and I'm going to admit that I lose my patience very quickly with white people who are, especially what I call casual racists. These are people that consider themselves liberal, they consider themselves progressives, but they have not done the shadow work. They have not looked at themselves and their unconscious biases and really rooted them out. And I have not rooted all mine out either. But for me, it's a daily exercise of examining that. And I take it very seriously. And my wife is always there to remind me and check my privilege when it slips through. And she's amazing at that. And I have to give her a lot of credit. And I don't think I could have done it without her. And so I think community is a really important aspect of that, of holding each other accountable. So I try to hold my white friends accountable. When I hear them making racist jokes or comments that are racist or even casually racist or misogynist, and I call them out. And you know what? I get a lot of flack for that, but I'm not going to stop. I'm a member of the Ditmas Park Facebook group. That's the neighborhood, the kind of subset of Flatbush that I live in, and it's a very white liberal neighborhood. And these people imagine themselves to be these champions of civil rights, and yet today they were talking about trying to get a security guard fired because he wasn't wearing a mask, or they have been calling for months. They've been calling for police to enforce social distancing, and now there's videos coming out almost every day of the NYPD abusing people in Canarsie and Bed-Stuy and Flatbush. And, again, I'm not trying to bash cops, but the system itself has racism institutionalized into it, and that trickles down. So what we need to do is say, is it appropriate for me to want police to enforce somebody not wearing a mask? Maybe I can just walk away from them. Maybe I could just walk around them. Do we really need to?
Talk to them.
or talk to them. But I almost feel like there can become an issue of, a white person telling a person of color what to do, put on a mask. I mean, I feel uncomfortable with that, with trying to impose my values on someone else. If I want to wear a mask, I'll wear a mask. And if I see someone else who doesn't feel like they need to wear a mask, then if I feel scared, I'll just avoid them. I don't need to impose my will on them. So I think that's an important thing. And our whole system is built on that idea, right? That's what democracy is. 51% of people telling 49% how to live. That's what has empowered racism and misogyny.
Danny, it's not going to change anytime soon. That's the truth. Kevin, what do you think? I mean,
Danny just made a very good point. There's a video that's going around about in Oklahoma, a truck driver made a delivery, and these white guys stopped him as he was leaving.
Right.
And it made me think about the fact that there are a lot of white people who think that they have agency over black people. And that is a legacy of slavery, that they think they can tell black people to do anything they want at any time. And that is institutionalized. Yeah. And so now we have to get past that. And it is not up to black people to get you past that.
Right.
I am not here to cure your racism. You have to do that. White people as a society have to do that. They have to decide we're not going to do that anymore. I need to be able to walk down the street the same as Danny does. That is not the case.
We don't walk out and we don't leave our home in this community after 9:30. Because what happens is if Moji decides I have too much energy, let me just walk around. The gym closes at whatever time. Let me walk through the complex because I can do 5 miles right here in this community. I can't walk out. I refuse to because there'll be phone calls being made. There's a black person walking and literally 5 security cars will come and they'll drive past you. And it's crazy, Kevin. But I think, again, we need to focus on our own sphere. Like if I am Danny's friend and Danny gets my pain and I'm Mary's friend and Anne-Marie gets my pain and Kevin, you have friends that are friends, close friends that are white people. I think we need to start to have the conversation somehow, either physically or verbally, so that they understand that we can't do this by ourselves because we're not the ones. I mean, there's black on black crime like anybody else and everywhere else, but we are not the ones, chasing ourselves down the block and shooting. I mean, it's a whole different monster. We're asking our black kids to go to school, be the best you can, right? And yet they have no sense of security anywhere because I talked to our 16-year-old son here, and he's understanding in his boarding school of what's going on when he calls me and he tells me, oh, this and this and this happened. And I can't say, I know it's racism, but I'm not going to tell him it's racism so he does not become angry, because that's what I sense a lot in African Americans and a lot of let me rephrase that. That's what I sense a lot in Black Americans. I'm sorry for using that word, but I have to distinguish. And African Americans are becoming angry as well. Because they tell you go to school, become very highly educated, and everything is going to be great. And then you show up at the airport and you can't stand on the first class line because you're black. So automatically you can't afford it. Unconscious bias. How do we help people to realize they have unconscious bias? Anybody can take that.
So can I say something? Like I said before, I am very tired of trying to teach white people not to be racist. I'm sorry, after 64 years of living, you need to grow up, okay? I'm black, get over it. It's my problem because I have to live in this society, but I am no longer going to take responsibility for your racism. And I never did. And if you're racist, and I see you acting in a racist manner, I'm going to call you on it. If somebody I work with who is white says something racist, you're gonna hear from me, and I'm gonna say something to you. which was one reason why I liked living in the South. People talk about how the South is racist and everything else, and it is. But there's one thing about the South that I appreciate, is that people always told you how they felt. They didn't hide their racism. Whereas here in New York, people, oh, I'm liberal, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, they don't want their child going to school with black kids. Who's more racist? A story I like to tell is I owned a business in North Carolina. And I bought the business from this older white couple who wanted to retire. And after I bought the business, this guy walked into my store. He goes, oh, well, where's the owners? And I said, well, I own the store now. He goes, he shook his head. He looked at me, he goes, well, congratulations. He goes, but I can't do business here anymore. I said, why? He goes, well, I don't buy product from the N-word. And he turned around and said, have a good day, and walked out the door. I can respect that. I don't like it, but at least he was honest with me. Whereas here in New York, somebody will walk up to me, oh, and they'll give me all kinds of excuses as to why they can't do this, they can't do that, when I know that it's because I'm a black man.
Yeah.
I'd rather they just come out and say it. That's fine. And we'll move on. So the whole point of all of this is that as a black man, I accept racism. I know it exists. I am not, however, going to excuse you for it. I'm not going to help you get over it. I will tell you how I feel, but it's your job to solve it, not mine. Does that make sense?
I can absolutely respect that.
And so do I. It makes a lot of sense. But in a society where, and in next week I'm bringing younger people on, 16 and up to like 25, because our generation, I'm 55, and most of us here are close to that age, and our generation is different from what we know is different from what they think they know, because in their world, racism is something that's on the outside. And a lot of times they'll make jokes. I'm a lesbian woman. When my son is around some of his friends, they'll be like, "Oh, that's so gay," and he would have to check them. What? But this is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here. Why we are all sitting here having this conversation, because I watch how he interacts with his friends. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a landlord tell me, "Moji, oh, I don't want any black people," but you're not really black.
I think
it's insulting when somebody says, "Oh, you're not really black. I don't want any black people, but you're not really black," and they think that's okay, and that makes them not racist. But when we start to call people out in a nice, there's no nice way, but in a very calm, because if I say something and if they say, "Oh, angry black woman," but it's not about being angry. It's just, if African people, when we get excited, our voice goes up. It's not that we're fighting you.
Well,
so go ahead.
Look how angry white people get when you criticize them about something. So why wouldn't black people be angry for being treated as second-class citizens? The anger is absolutely justified, and it's absolutely understandable. And people who don't understand it it's because they don't have the patience or don't want to bother to try. And that's what Kevin's saying. And I absolutely agree with his frustration, and I can respect that. I don't think it's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's Anne-Marie's responsibility. It's our responsibility to call out the people in our families. And I've had this discussion at Sunday dinner with my nephews who make the comments like you were just saying, "Oh, that's so gay," or, why do they always have to, why are they making Spider-Man black now? So these are the conversations that I have with my circles, and it is our responsibility to explain that. And I've had the discussion about representation, and my nephews are young, they don't want to get it yet, but hopefully one day they will. But I will continue to be that voice that challenges that.
See, that's another thing when you said about what you just said about representation, because people think because there's diversity, that means there's inclusion. Because I could be the only black person working in a particular office and everybody's doing what they're doing, and I can't go to, I remember many years ago, Danny, when I started real estate, I was told I couldn't go here, I couldn't go there, and you and I ran into each other, and you're like, "You can go anywhere you want. Are you crazy?"
I see
That was
about that.
almost 20-something years ago. So times are changing, they're just not changing fast enough. But if each and every one that's out there, you know, without diversity, forced diversity doesn't work. Voluntary diversity creates inclusion.
Yes.
But if there's a quota that people have to meet, they'll just put anybody there, right? And then they'll just be sit warmers because they said I have to have a woman and a black person, so they get a black woman. Now a black man that's qualified for that position doesn't get it because diversity, right? They're looking for diversity. So a lot of times I'm finding that sometimes when we force diversity on people without them having an emotional connection to the reason why they're doing what they're doing, there's no inclusion in it. Because I've been in many circles as a lesbian woman in a heterosexual community where they invite me, but nobody talks to me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody engages with me. So in reality, I was invited. There's diversity, but there's no inclusion. How do we, what are the kind of things we can do to promote inclusion?
I think there has to be healing that takes place, right? So what, like, here's my question, right? From a white person to a black person. Let's say we get rid of it all, right? Let's say the racism gets taken away. Does the pain go away? Does the anger from it go away? You understand what I'm saying? Like, do we ever truly alleviate the problem? Like, the scars are still there. Will the anger still be there? I don't know. I mean, can you shine light on that for me?
Kevin, you go first, and then I'll go.
Yes, I think the anger does go away. I mean, I'm not angry at white people in general. I'm angry with society sometimes. I'm angry with individuals for something they have done to me personally. I think as time goes on, people become less and less angry as there's more interaction between people in the workplace, which is where, frankly, people spend most of their time. A lot of it's going to go away. Will there always be racism? Yes, there's always going to be some amount of racism. Can we limit it? Yes. And one way of doing that is, again, with the diversity. If you put black people on the boards of major companies, those companies will become more diverse.
That's right.
Because it's not just a matter of having a black person there, it's a matter of having a different viewpoint and a different way of thinking, which is why, if companies don't have representation, they can't actually sell or deal with the different communities. So yeah, we need diversity, we need representation, we need inclusion. I don't want to just come to a meeting because you think I'm a black person who's going to
Thank you.
and just sit there. If you invite me to a meeting, I'm going to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be present and active. And if you don't like what I have to say, that's your problem, not mine. So, you'll have to deal with that. But we do need that inclusion, like Moji said. We need that diversity. We need people to understand that we're all human. I have the same goals, desires as anybody else. And those goals and desires don't change simply because I'm black. If I wanted to be something, I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that, and I was able to achieve all of that. Black kids growing up have those same desires. They don't all want to be basketball players. They don't all want to be football players or a rapper. A lot of them want to do something else, and it's our job as adults to help them get there. And part of that is with diversity and inclusion.
I am so grateful that you touched on that, because a lot of times what we're finding, Anne-Marie, you asked about, if the hurt ever goes away or the pain ever goes away, that I have PTSD a lot of times because, what I went through in Staten Island, I did with a lot of grit. A lot of times, my wife and I were trying to buy a home, We gave the guy full price. You know, this was the one that broke the camel's back. We gave the guy full price. We were putting 20% down. It wasn't an FHA mortgage. Everything was fantastic and clean. He accepted the offer, and the neighbors came and told him he couldn't do it because the house we're buying is directly across a very prominent Irish Catholic church that a lot of people own. So he reneged on the offer. Now, the pain does go away, but the pain never goes away. What we learn to do is manage it. When I, Moji, walk into a room and I can pick people that have negative energies towards me because I have seen it too many times. Once in a while, I might be wrong. And what happens at that point is that I go into my shell. There's certain neighborhoods I won't try to go and sell a house in Staten Island, you know, for a long time. You remember that. And together. And people like, don't let them stop you. But honey, how many times am I going to go there and have somebody slap me in the face or hold a knife behind them because they're scared I'm going to jump them? And I'm looking at these people going, wait a minute. I grew up in a country where my dad had employees that were white all over the world. So I didn't even know what racism was until I was almost 20. So for me, it's not the same as an African-American that's been going through that every bloody moment of their life, right? I put up this question, which I don't like to do politics because we'll be here till tomorrow. But Hanem says, no, you don't want to open the door to politics with Danny on the show. We are not getting off that topic. But let's just touch on this real quick. What do you think is the role of political correctness in affecting, downplaying, addressing the issue? This is political correctness.
Can I touch on that? Because, you know, like, I think about political correctness, right? That I think that actually has a negative effect, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're forcing people, you know, people don't say things and they don't know that they're saying it and they don't realize that it's wrong, right? And you're just telling someone, well, you can't say that. That offends somebody. You can't say this because that offends someone. And I think that the key to all of this is touching on what Kevin was saying. I think it's more about, we got to kind of shake up and put things, it's about exposure to different people. You know, like we were joking, you know, we were like, am I your only white friend, Moji, this morning, you know? And you know, really, come on, think about it. I mean, listen, do I have more white friends than I do have black friends? Yeah, because unfortunately, you know, where I lived and all this stuff, it just wasn't mixed up a bit. You know, I think about, and I'm going to use my child as an example. Okay, I have a transgender child, and if I surfed through Facebook and watched all of the, you know, bashing that I see about transgenders, I'll end up killing people, honestly, because I get so angry. But I learned to change my approach, and I learned, instead of getting angry and lashing out at someone and saying, you're wrong and you can't say that and you can't do this because that's offensive to this person. I decided this person has never been exposed to transgender people. So therefore, this person sees transgender as weird or a dysfunction or, you know, a mental disorder or whatever it is that he sees. I don't know what it is that he sees. I'm going to have a conversation with this person. And I remember it was a friend of mine who had posted something negative about transgender. It was I had a transgender child and was, you know, at 5 years old was, you know, referring to born daughter as a son, and I used to like her, and it offended me that this guy, you know, is in a circle of my business, and I said I decided to call him up and say, you know, I have a transgender child, right? And you know what you posted offended me. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, teach me about it. Yeah. And I did. And I explained it to him, and I explained the difference, you know, why a child or a person is transgender, why they're not, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I get it. And I think that's more that has to happen rather than the reaction. Like you said in the very beginning, we're reacting to each other. I'm conditioned to, you know, white people are conditioned to fear black people. So we react when we see a black person. Black people are used to, because they've gotten, you know, all these horrible things happen to them that they have to behave a certain way and react a certain way around a white person for their fear and their anger and their hurt. We have to start talking and say, I'm going to talk. Let me show you something. Let me,
I'm glad you brought that topic up about the LGBTQ community. One of the things that I've done, and Kevin, I've known you quite a while. I've known everybody on this panel for quite a while. One of the things that I've done along my evolution is to bring people along with me, because a lot of times when we see other races, other communities, we don't understand who they are. But when you get get to see them just living their lives, it helps a lot. That's why, for me, when you talk about political correctness affecting or downplaying addressing the issue, it's very important that we allow people to speak. Because how would I know what a person, if Jane Doe comes to me, a lot of times on Facebook in the past, I used to fight people that talked about homosexuality being a sin, being this, being that. Now, what I started doing was I'll let them rant on the page, and then I'll call them and we'll have a conversation. The moment that there's my voice behind that, half the time, I'm going to post something later on today about a Muslim guy in Nigeria who came on one of my shows. He had seen a video that 55,000 people watched about PPE. And he loved it enough to follow the page. And then this one day, because I always throw it in that whatever I'm doing, that I'm gay. I'm a lesbian woman married to another woman. He's like, oh my God, I hate gay people. And I didn't, people went at him, and I called him. I called him right there on the show. After he finished the show, he came back into my inbox. And I called him again, and I spoke to him, and he said, look, I've never met a gay person. You're the first gay person I've met. And the whole conversation changed. So this is one of the reasons why I'm asking the same question again. How do we go forward? But before we finish, we close out with how do we go forward? Kevin, we talk about racism a lot. Black people, how the white people discriminate against us. Let's talk about black on black racism. And I know a lot of people often say it's not racism, but the way do African Americans treat, do Black Americans treat African Americans, as in people that came from first, green card holders, immigrants? Are they racist towards us, and how do they view us? Because that's a good place to start.
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I just had a conversation with an African woman, and we had the conversation because she posted a lot of comments about Black Americans that almost anybody would consider racist. And I said, you're also Black? And she goes, no, I'm not Black, I'm African. I was like, well, if you're walking down the street, anybody who sees you is just gonna say you're Black. They don't know whether you're African or anything else. Until I hear you speak, because you have an English accent or whatever. That is something that the Black community needs to deal with. And I think some of that is because Africans who come to this country are treated differently than Black Americans. Yep. You said it yourself at the beginning. If you have an English accent, you're still Black, but you're a different Black.
Yeah.
And you are treated differently because it's automatically assumed that you have more education. It's assumed you have other things that are viewed as valued to the larger community. And that breeds resentment. And it shouldn't, but it does. I mean, I have some friends who, if their child came home with an African partner, they'd go crazy. They'd go ballistic. Like, how could you marry an African? And they're Black. No,
same thing in my community.
That doesn't make any sense. I personally don't understand it. But my upbringing isn't typical. So, but yeah, it exists. It shouldn't. And that's something that we as a community, we have to deal with the same way the white community has to deal with their problems. It shouldn't exist. It does. We need to have more of that conversation. I'll have more conversations with that African woman that posted that stuff. And, I gave her some things to think about. And, maybe we'll reach an accommodation soon.
Thank you so much for touching on that, because a lot of times people don't realize when we're talking about racism and discrimination and such. Titi Layomi says lateral racism. Lateral racism is one of the worst. My worst experiences with racism has been from African American, Black Americans, and my own people, and that's another show. But what I realized is that I didn't realize that there was a privilege that came with being an African woman, right? As an African, as opposed to a Black American. Because when you think about when I step into a room, actually, let's go way back. I know who my grandfather is. I know who my great grandfather is. I know the house and the hut.
Yeah.
My father lived in. I know the food. I know the culture. I know why we do what we do. And what I didn't know, I learned at Columbia University taking a Yoruba class, the Ifa, religion. I know a lot of that. I can trace my ancestry way back, many generations deep. It gives us a sense of confidence. It makes you stand tall. Even if you came from a hut and you ate from a leaf, as in your plate was a leaf, and you slept on the floor on a mat, you still have a different mentality in most cases as an African person. Because people always ask that question, why do Africans come here and they can make it? And because Africans don't have a choice but to make it here. And I'll tell you why. First of all, when you come from someplace else, you'll have the ability to see clearer as opposed to when you're standing in it. And they've been telling you you're garbage, you can't make it, you're this, you're that, and you've been conditioned to believe that you're less. So yes, I honestly believe that it's lateral racism, where in Africa, the Igbo people are considered to be less than the Yorubas, and we all have it. Wherever we go, Blacks, there's racism everywhere. It's just the different levels. And I'm going to be doing another show, I think next week, where Africans and not African Americans, Black Americans, I'm sorry. I just want, it's confusing in my head sometimes, African Americans and Black Americans to come together, and we need to start dialoguing in general, because until we all start to speak our truth, which is where political correctness is not right, because you're forcing people not to say things instead of helping them to change the way they think by allowing them to be their authentic self. Am I making any sense?
Yes, absolutely. 1000% agree.
So this show is the beginning of many, many conversations that I think we need to start to have. I would continue on and on, but I know a couple of, a few people have to go and do their own things. And it'd be fun to come back to the table and start to talk about what it is that we can do better. For me, I have amazing ideas of integrating the white people in, everybody needs to start. I
think exposure is key, and starting it at, like, I know for me, when I made a decision to send Maya to school, right? My ex-husband was adamant about, all white Catholic school, that, a prominently white neighborhood. No, my kid's going to public school, because there's no way my kid's going to grow up thinking there's only white people in the world. My kid, I want him exposed to all different walks of life, and I made that choice consciously because I wanted him to be exposed, and I wanted him to be an organic human being, and I think that's the key, is that we have to really start kind of integrating all of our cultures together and start learning about them rather than judging them.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Let's take a couple of questions before we get off. We do a closing. Olu says, I see video clips of how police address white families who are not social distancing in the parks compared to the black in the parks. Living in England, what we see is not nice at all. We have issues in England too. Yes, I hear you.
Issues. It's not just America.
Yeah, it's all over. I could tell you stories about what we call tribalism in Nigeria, right, which is basically where one tribe believes they're better than the other. Right. And there's a tribe in Nigeria that had slaves, that made slaves of other tribes. So white people didn't create slavery, just so you know. Slavery has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's in the Bible from many, many years ago. We just need to start to face the reality that it's time for us to start to get to know each other, to understand each other's pain, and to see how we can help to make things better. Angela Oliver says, is it racism or prejudice between Africans and Black Americans? Kevin, you take that.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said before, it exists between every group that is, quote, different, unquote. We need to get past that. We're all humans. There's no difference between me and anybody else. There's no difference between Anne Marie and Moji, other than the color of your skin. You're both women. You're both people. You're both human. No difference between me and Danny. I mean, just you need to accept that people are different. You need to let people live their lives. That's all. You know, and just accept that there's differences, and get past it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It never did.
I hear you. I hear you. In closing the show today, and I have to say, I'm so grateful that you guys all came on, and I hope some people got a small little nugget out of this 1 hour that you guys dedicated to this movement of awareness, as opposed to, you know, fighting each other on social media. I think once we start to open up a small window into each other's experiences, you know, we might be able, if we change one person today, if we got one person to say, oh, I didn't realize, you know, this is what I'm doing. I think that the hour is being spent in a fantabulous way, and hopefully they'll go on and teach somebody else. What would you like the audience to take away from today? Anne-Marie, you go first.
Well, I didn't want to get into politics, but I'm going to go real quick. We all have, the one thing that we all have to really know, and you have to kind of open your mind to it, is that they want us all separated.
Yeah.
They want us all separated, black, white. They love it when we fight, you know, and they want to keep us separated, because united, we're a powerhouse. And the more people really start, the Democrat, Republican, the black, the white, all of it's got to stop. All of it's got to stop. And that's the only time all of us as a collective get to take our lives back.
Danny, go ahead.
For me, I would say, if you can take away one thing, just empathize with other people whose situation is different than yours. Just really try, just for a moment. Your ego will still be there in a minute. Just put your opinion aside and try to really actively listen and to hear what the other person is saying, and understand what life is like in their shoes. And I think that's the best way to, you know, a documentary that really inspired me, and I can't remember the name, but it's about Daryl Davis, who is a Black American jazz artist. And he basically started befriending literal Ku Klux Klan members. And he, to this date, has befriended and used empathy to convince them, or to basically, they've given over their hoods to him for him to destroy, and they've left the Klan because he helped them understand that Black Americans are humans also, or that Blacks in general are humans. And I feel like that's really inspiring. If a Black man can risk his life, probably, right? Like by befriending these Klan members, and spend the time and put the patience and empathy into convincing racists who are committed racists. I mean, these aren't just casual liberal racists. They literally had hoods. If he can do that, then I certainly can have conversations with my white friends when they make racist remarks or jokes or call out their racist behaviors, but do it in an empathetic way where I'm not just beating them over the head and saying, hey, you're being racist, cut that out. If I can really reach them with empathy and help them bridge that gap and help them see what the plight or what the experiences of people of color are, I think then I can help, so that, you know, Kevin doesn't have to do it, and Moji doesn't have to do it, because I don't think it's your responsibility. I don't think you should have to put your life aside to educate racists.
Thank you.
So that's my 2 cents.
Kevin.
I would echo both what Danny and Anne-Marie said. People have to realize that their experience is not the experience of everyone else.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own experience. Everyone has their own situation. And it is up to you as an individual to accept that and recognize that their experience is their own, and whatever they're feeling is what they're feeling. And stop dismissing it as, oh, you're playing the race card, or oh, you're playing the gender card, or the LGBTQ card, whatever it is. That those are real experiences that people are having, and don't diminish those feelings, don't diminish those experiences. Just accept that they have had them and learn to deal with them, and maybe offer out a helping hand. And the last thing I would say is vote in November.
Yes, definitely vote in November. I thank you all for coming in. I'm going to take you guys off. Yes, vote, please. But I'm going to say thank you, and thank you for coming in, and then I'll do my closing statement. And I hope to see you guys soon on Authentic Conversations.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you for coming in.
Bye.
Bye. So it's been an amazing afternoon. It's been a lot of, I think, transparent conversations amongst friends and you guys. And thank you guys for coming in to join. The one and only, one of the most important things that I would like you guys to take away from this show, and I always like you to take away 3 things. Number 1 is that we're all the same. Number 2 is that it's very important for bystanders to speak up when you see unconscious bias, when you see somebody being harassed or bullied. It's very important that you speak up. And it's not that you speak up and punch the person in the face, but in a loving kind of way. Yeah, Moji's trying to learn to do things differently, because the old ways are not working. You know, beating somebody else over the head on social media is not working. If your friend is making, horrible remarks about somebody's race or gender or something, and you're liking the post, you're part of the problem, because you're part of the people adding fuel to a fire that's burning. Understand that every pain and every hurt stays with the person. Sit here and smile. But every day when we're getting bashed and trolled on social media, it hurts. And little by little, people start to shut down. African-American kids, Black kids, we're all in trouble. We have a generation of young boys and young girls that no longer believe in themselves, because they're afraid that no matter what they do, they're not good enough. And it's our job as humans to go out there and support each other and allow and let people be who they are created to be. And stop judging, stop discriminating. Of course, if somebody's mean to you, that's a whole different thing. But allow your space to be open. Without being open, it's impossible for you to receive from the universe and to see the person that's in front of you. We're all human. Help us to help you as a people to understand each other. I'm Nigerian, Kevin is African-American, but we're still the same people. And Marie was on the show. She's a white woman. She's my sister. I call her my sister. I don't call her my friend. Danny, I've known for 30 years. We're all human. We all have different experiences. But if we start to share our experiences, I'm praying that, I hope that it would help a whole lot. This is Mojisola Wilson, and I say thank you for coming into Authentic Conversations with Moji. I will see you guys very, very soon. Next Saturday, we're having another segment. I hope you can make it. Bye. Stay safe.